Well, welcome to Ann7. My name is Nandine Doni, who will be hosting you today, and we have a very special guest in studio with us. We have an ANC member, Deputy Secretary General Jessie Duarte, who will be in studio and basically giving us an outlook of the recent events and happenings that have been happening in and around South Africa. Joining me in studio today. Thank you so much for joining me, Mrs. Jessie Duarte. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you very much, Nandi. It's a pleasure for me to be here as well.
Awesome. Now, my first question to you, I'll go straight into it. You know, the EFF, the DA, COPE, all have sort of insinuated or suggested that our President Jacob Zuma stepped down. Now, while it is clear that the verdict doesn't seem to indict the president in any way, but the opposition seems to suggest that these undying allegations have dented his rather leadership skills. How do you view this?
Well, I think that, you know, the job of any opposition is to throw mud, and to throw mud as much as you can and make it stick. The allegations against our president arose in 2007, and they're old allegations. Of course, the only people who can make a determination as to whether or not he should be charged is the National Prosecuting Authority. Nobody else has that authority in the country. But the narrative of opposition parties would wish they're sending out a message as if it's already happened. And this is not true. All of us have to wait. The Supreme Court has spoken. We, as the ANC, have said, well, we respect the court, but obviously we need to wait and see what the National Prosecuting Authority is going to say now. And we cannot have people outside of the ANC determining who leads the ANC. We would not suggest to the DA that there should be another leader instead of Mmusi Maimane, although they do need a better leader. But that's not our call.
Now, while the ANC has come out with a statement, it doesn't clarify the party's stand on the 786 charges against Zuma. The opposition expects President to face this, obviously. Don't you think it will be in interest of the President and the party to face the charges and clear his name once and for all?
Well, I think that the determination, firstly, has to come as to whether the National Prosecuting Authority will decide to charge the president, because none of us can make that determination. I certainly cannot do that. I think that the president himself cannot do that. You know, he's studying, as we heard in the media, he's studying the outcome. He may make another determination about whether he wants to appeal or not. That's not a call that any other person can make except himself. The reason the ANC responded in the way that we did was simply to say we respect the court's decision. However, what we must bear in mind that the court, the DA, the EFF, COPE, these are not people who can decide whether a person is going to be charged, because the separation of powers in our country must be defended. And what does ultimately happen is that in the media space, the DA pretends to be judge, jury and prosecutor, and the EFF has climbed on that bandwagon as well. The EFF and the DA are very similar in politics as well as in the way in which they see themselves in the opposition space in this country. And unfortunately, there is this reality. It is the NPA that will make that decision, and we need to be careful not to begin to put thoughts into their heads about what they ought and ought not to do.
Now, the spokesperson for the ANC, Zizi Kodwa, had indicated that there will be repercussions for those who are speaking out of turn, you know, regarding speaking outside the party structures, and also, you know, it's speaking ill of the president, etc.
But we always caution that once you are a leader in the organization and you have an issue, raise it within the organization where we can debate and discuss it, and you might even be able to influence other people with your views. But when you use, in particular, the South African mainstream media to make those thoughts known. And we have a view that some of the media have a campaign and have had a campaign against President Zuma since 2007. You're exacerbating a view that is expressed by the opposition. What we need is, inside of the ANC, very robust and very honest debate and discussion, wherein decisions that we take are respected. We already have a decision, and our decision was that our president is not going to be recalled. That was at an extended National Working Committee meeting with 80 members of the NEC present and all chairs and secretaries of provinces. So people had ample opportunity to express their views. There were views expressed that were both positive. The majority of it was very positive towards the president, some negative views in that meeting. It is disappointing that some national leaders and some provincial leaders have chosen to express themselves outside of the organizational framework, which makes it difficult, but nevertheless, I don't think when Mr. Kodwa says repercussions, the repercussions are that those issues will be raised at the next NEC meeting. And people will be asked to explain themselves, which is what the ANC does. The ANC is not a dictatorial organization. We're a democratic organization. Things do and are very openly discussed.
Now, moving slightly away from that matter, we have heard several narratives around the Stellenbosch Mafia and the white monopoly capital trying to engineer the regime change. Some even say EFF is being used as a political front in this campaign, apart from the DA. The ANC has not spoken out in detail about that. Does it not believe in this theory at this point?
We believe, and we've also heard the accusations about a Stellenbosch Mafia, and obviously one needs to look at what people are saying, but the common understanding is that if one looks at who owns the majority capital in our country, unfortunately, it is still owned either by foreigners. 47% of our stock exchange is in foreign hands. The balance, except for 3%, is owned by black South African people. So you have 97% of our total capital assets in this country not clearly owned by the black majority in South Africa. And that is, in a sense, corporate capture. But corporate capture has other elements to it as well. Corporate capture could also just mean simply a mechanism for ensuring that a particular entity gets a tender, or a particular entity is able to influence the direction of the thinking of leadership. And really that was our concern, and that is how we raised our concern. We had never thought that out of raising our concern, one particular family would be pounced upon by the entire nation, and in a very racist way, unfortunately. However, having said that, we still have the concern. We are still concerned that the ownership of the means of production in our country is not in the hands of black South African people. And that has to change. And that is really the aims and objectives long-term of the African National Congress.
Now, Toke Sugwalo has coined an interesting phrase in his open letter to one of the Gupta brothers. He says the control of the economy and the land by a minority that has continued since apartheid era is the country capture. He alleges that the country capture continues in South Africa till today, and perhaps is the single best, or rather biggest, reason for disempowered millions of the country, millions around the country, that is. Would you say you agree with this term regarding what you just mentioned?
Most certainly, dispossession of land in our country is the single most compelling factor in poverty in South Africa. The fact that land, when it was dispossessed in the 1800s, there were the wars of dispossession. There were many issues where South African black people tried to hold on to their land, and their land was forcefully taken from them. So the issue is that restoration of land is one of the major policy perspectives of the ANC-led government, using the constitution, that is, to make that happen. One of the things that is correct in what Tokyo says is that the same minority of super capitalists in South Africa own the means of production, are the people who own the newspapers, are the people who own the mining sector, are the people who own the manufacturing industry, food production industry, retail industry. You know, you're not going to find a black South African who owns a major supermarket that sells food to our people. You're not going to find a black South African that has a car rental company that rents vehicles to all South Africans, owned by black South Africans. And certainly this is of grave concern, because transformation of the economy means literally that one has to see a majority of black people owning the economic development in our country and being the people in charge of our economy. That just isn't the truth. The banks, for example, there's no bank that is in the hands of any black South African except as an employee. But the major shareholders of banks are all, as people call it, white capital. And we're not looking at this from a race point of view. White South Africans have as much right to own capital, but the reality is you cannot have a situation in a country where the majority of the population is black, where the country's economy is still in the hands of a minority white sector of the population.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned the banks, because that leads me to my next question.
Sure.
The closure of the Oak Bay banks, that's definitely one situation, has come as an absolute shocker to most people. Something that even the most anti-Gupta theorists had difficulty explaining or understanding. Even then, we hear there are some attempts to justify the coercive and collusive tactics employed by powerful financial institutions such as the four major banks, without ascribing any reasons whatsoever as to this closure. Looks like a few people, through their shareholding, as you mentioned, have complete control over who is allowed to do business and in South Africa. Who is not, or rather, who is allowed to do business in South Africa? I mean, isn't that sort of? I mean, recently we've had the ministers trying to have a conversation with the banks, and they sort of refused. How? And it's been dubbed undemocratic. How would we rather say it is undemocratic in their stance?
Yeah, look, I think firstly, the banks are governed by some 205 pieces of legislation that forces them to comply, even with international rules and regulations, which, if they don't, would mean that they fall outside of the international sphere of banking practices. But having said that, I think our country has experienced a very unusual display of the complete arrogance of capitalism, because it looked like the banks made their own decisions on their own time, but the impact of their decisions also forced a domino effect for one company in particular, where other suppliers, the entire value chain, then makes a decision to withdraw services, which shows that the interconnectedness of capital in South Africa. And that is the most dangerous thing that we as a nation must look at, is when when 5 banks or 4 banks make a decision, what does that say about investment in South Africa? And how will that impact on other companies who might step on the toes of a big industry in the mining sector? And it's an assumption that really this started because of a decision about selling coal to Eskom at a lower rate.
Price.
So your coal plus companies were then put on the spot, and they were making a lot of money. And perhaps the issue really that we need to debate as a nation is, at what point is it correct for the banks to make decisions based on on assumptions. It would be better if facts were put on the table, such as there was a misdemeanor in terms of one or other of the 205 banking regulations. We all have to comply with banking regulations, all of us. No one is exempt. But it's unprecedented, and this has never happened in South Africa before. And yet there are large monopolistic tendencies that are pervasive in the society, where one would wonder what kind of stringent application of the laws are applied to everybody, and are the laws applied equally across the board, or do they select? And it's been an unfortunate reality, perhaps a shockingly unacceptable one as well. If, as you said, even the most anti-Oak Bay people have been shocked by this. But I think that the eye-opener is the pervasive and absolute arrogance of capitalism is shown very clearly here.
Now, going back to the Guptas, as we mentioned, the calls for the Guptas to go back to India, and the press calling them Indian businessmen as opposed to South Africans have been described by various commentators as xenophobic. Do you think a big section of our society has been guilty of sort of knee-jerk reaction on the issue?
I think that firstly the media tends to become very petty when they are going after any individual. As you know, I was in one of the drawings as a person linked to the family, which I'm not. I think that you begin to wonder, and then any person of Indian descent, are people like that going to be put in a corner right now? And they're very long-standing business people in this country whom have never been politicized. But I think what the media has done is they've politicized this particular family because of the relationship with the son of the president. Whether that's wrong or right, in my view it's wrong. It does say that children of politicians have no life, can have no life, need to sit in a back room somewhere. I worry about that quite a bit. But what I do think is wrong is the description of people as Indian or Chinese, or I've never heard anybody being described as European or French or American or anything other than a business person. This is a media matter that the media needs to debate. You know, in the old days, the media used to describe people in this country as a Venda, as a Zulu, as a Sotho, and then they would say 2 people and a Venda were arrested, for example. We're almost back there. And I think that the media, especially the monopolistic media, is trying to drive us back to race terms. Very soon they'll start using other acronyms with 2 people. And one worries because we've come a long way in South Africa, and these are simply business people. And my understanding is that the family are all South African citizens. So that is a difficulty that we need to accept and understand. Do you, as a journalist, have a right to classify people when race classification is something that we're moving away from or trying to move away from? It is sad, but I also think, to be frank and blunt, our media has stepped back into the apartheid reality very quickly, without blanching.
Very interesting. Now, the Minister of Mines yesterday, while on a visit to the Optimum coal mine and the thousands of workers it employs, said that some of the 4 powerful banks have refused to meet the ministerial delegation, as mentioned earlier. He sees it as an insult of democratic structures. Do you think the government has no other power than to watch the loss of 7,500 jobs, direct and indirect, more so 50,000 indirect jobs, if the banks continue to engage with it?
Well, the power is much more in the hands of the private sector in this regard, in that the Oak Bay has a right to go to the banking ombudsperson to lodge a complaint, and that would be a good thing to do. However, in terms of the loss of labor, and which is, I've heard the word collateral damage so often in the last 2 weeks. Workers are not just collateral damage. Workers are people who feed families. And it would be better if there was some humanity shown towards those workers, as opposed to trying simply to deal with running people out of the country. And I think this is what this is about. You can't run a citizen of this country out of the country. You cannot do that. And I think the difficulty here is that thus far, no one is able to say that here are the facts. We know for sure that a minister was appointed by the Gupta family. Even the Deputy Minister of Finance, even though he has a right to speak out, but he wasn't appointed as a Minister of Finance. And therefore, whatever conversation he might have had with whoever in the Gupta family was of absolutely no consequence. And it is really a difficulty that he is being put in a very difficult position. He's a very good person. He's also a very good Deputy Minister. And what the media are doing is they're making him the hero against the anti, towards, as if he's anti the ANC, and he's not. I need to say that.
Yeah.
Because I think that when people speak out, they don't necessarily speak out because they're wrong. He might have had a concern. If I were him, I would have raised this matter within the ANC, confronted it there. He chose differently. I can't blame him for that. But, you know, it begins to show a kind of little difficulty that we have in terms of people taking and choosing sides in a debate and in a discussion. I suppose that's human nature.
Yeah. Now, the Public Enterprise Minister, Lynn Brown, and Eskom chief have been the latest hit out at the media narrative that the Gupta family owned Tegeta Resources, exploiting Eskom through lopsided coal contracts, when the facts are completely the opposite. What has been the reason for this kind of reporting?
Again, I have to say that Lynn Brown is a person I've known for over 35 years, and a woman of great integrity. Her interest would be what is in the best interest of Eskom. Now, she appoints a very professional, Brian, to the current CEO of Eskom, is a wonderful professional person who looks to lowering as much as he can the costs to the company. And anybody who blames him for doing that, and any CEO in South Africa who blames him for looking for coal at a lower price, is simply not being realistic. Because every CEO in the world would want to lower costs to company. Every CEO in the world. And I think that this may not be just a media problem. This may well be the big boys in the mining industry fighting for a coal price that they didn't win. And secondly, that my understanding is, and I've just seen it through the media, and I've heard Ms. Brown speak on television and so on, is that we cannot have a situation where the media determines who people can have relationships with and what those relationships ought to be. No one tells Ferial Hafaji or Karima Brown who their friends should be. No one would dare to tell the owners of the media who their friends should be. Everybody has a friend somewhere where they link up with. But does that necessarily mean that it's negative and corrupt? I think that Lynn Brown and the CEO of Eskom looked for the best coal price, and they found one. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And we should continue to have CEOs who do exactly that, who challenge the old guard, who challenge 30-year-old and 40-year-old contracts for new contracts, who look at our mineral resources differently and make them work for our country, irrespective of who's on the other side.
Now, moving a little bit away from that, the DA is confident that it will have a major impact in the metropolitans, specifically speaking Tshwane, Johannesburg, in the municipal elections. It is clearly eyeing these two cities. If the ANC were to lose these cities, who will have to take the responsibility, the Gauteng leadership or the president?
No, I think we firstly don't intend to lose the metros. That's firstly. Secondly, the question of service delivery throughout the country is always a matter of concern to all of us. Gauteng, Johannesburg has done very well. I've just been to Tshwane several times. People are not unhappy about service delivery. They're raising other issues. They're raising internal ANC political dynamics, which has got nothing to do with service delivery. We're working very hard. We never make predictions. We're not arrogant. We don't say that we will win X, Y, and Z. We simply go to the voters and ask them to vote for the ANC, because voters have integrity. And they don't just shift alliances from a political party because the DA says so. I think the DA is panicking quite seriously. And today they sent out an SMS in which they're fighting the EFF now, calling the EFF violent and telling people to vote for the DA. This is because they're quite concerned that they share the same portion of opposition space that there is available, and they're worried that the EFS is going to take some of the space that they have away from them. You know, we've never made predictions, ever. We've simply said to journalists and to everyone else, we are working to talk to every voter. And that's what the ANC does. We go door to door. We ask our cadres on the ground to volunteer airtime. That's not because we cash-strapped, as the Sowetan is trying to suggest. It's because that's the nature of how we've worked since 1994. Whatever people can give to the organization willingly and voluntarily, they do. I give my extra airtime from a private phone, as long as it's not a phone being paid for by either the ANC or any government department. We don't encourage that. Private phones. So let me just say that I think the DA, the EFF and COPE, I, at the moment, think that they can speak as much as they like. The only thing that counts is when the votes are counted and announced. Nothing before that actually matters. And quite honestly, I'm beginning to feel sorry for Mmusi Maimane. I think that his desperation is leading him to be quite a reckless leader of a political party. There's no plan. We've not heard a plan. The entire manifesto of the DA was responding to the ANC. What is it that you're actually saying you're going to do? We've said what we're going to do, very clearly and very loudly. And, you know, there's no need for us to retract on anything. If the voters are going to vote for us, it's because they believe that the balance sheet of the African National Congress is a positive balance sheet. And that's actually the balance sheet led by President Jacob Zuma.
Well, thank you very much, Jessie Duarte, for joining us in studio today.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you very much. Hopefully we'll be able to do this again soon.
Thank you.